2 Samuel 3:28 through 32. Through 31, I'm sorry. Afterwards, when David heard of this, he said, "My kingdom and I are forever blameless before the Lord for the blood of Abner, the son of Ner." So what he's saying is, what happened was Joab killed Abner as a result of his brother's death, and David had no part in this. David was at the process of trying to make peace and use Abner as an ally. So for Joab to do it kind of shows that it was led by David, a sneak attack type thing, but David's at this point saying he had nothing to do with it. The blood ain't on his hands. And later on, he will go to punish Abner. But that's going to... People sometimes are going to blame us for things we ain't involved in just because it makes it seem like we are. Those around us, sometimes we'll get a bad reputation because of people who may be in contact with us, maybe even people who help us. We may get a bad reputation for that. And David was at that point because Joab was underneath him, that he was going to, and he's putting a stop to it. He's saying, I had nothing to do with it. It ain't a result of me. And he knew that he didn't have blame before the Lord. Yeah, people may have been pointing blame at him, but he knew where he stood with the Lord was most important. And we need to put that most important, because what people say may not be true about us. But where we stand with the Lord, that's what really counts. And David knew that. May it fall upon the head of Joab and upon all his father's house. May the house of Joab never be without one who has a discharge, or who has a leopard, or who leans on a staff, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food. So he's putting a curse on his family as a result of doing this. Him doing this could have caused the whole uniting the kingdoms to be a waste, been something that set a big setback right here. So he's putting a curse on Joab's family. Of course, Joab would have been the only one face the consequence of this actively, but then the curse itself would carry on to generations through Joab. Verse 30. So Joab and his brother Asahel killed Abner because he killed Asahel, his brother. They killed their brother at Gibeon in the battle. So this is the reason why he did this. And we can relate somewhat to this, understand how family, much we care for it and how we try to protect them. And we can understand his frustration with David making peace with Abner, because it goes to the fact that we care for those closest to us. And that's simply what he acted on, the fact that he cared and he wanted justice, so he took it by his own means. And doing that's where he crossed the line. And oftentimes that's exactly what causes us to fall to sin. The fact that we see something necessarily... Satan's known for taking what is good and twisting it to where we follow the flesh with it, rather than take patience and wait on the Lord to lead us. What Joab was wanting could have been resolved if he just was patient. Maybe not the way he wanted, but something better was going to be done out of it. And Joab wasn't the only person to lose people in that fight either. Abner lost his men as well. He lost more. So sometimes we got to consider the cost of things, but we also got to let God come first. Because Joab doing this showed a lack of humbleness. We got to be humble when we commit to the Lord. We got to be humble when we serve and strive for the Lord. We can't allow personal differences to keep us from doing what He wants us to do. We can't allow personal differences to affect His greater plan. We can't allow these things to keep us from following the Lord. Joab doing this one action, which seemed good to him, cost jeopardized the kingdom, but it also caused Joab's family to have this curse upon him. It would cost Joab his life from this simple action that seemed just. And at a time, it would have been justified if he would have killed Abner before David started making peace with him. Because at that point, he was still an enemy. But at this point, Abner was no longer an enemy. He could have even talked to David before they started making peace. David was a reasonable man, would have heard him out. And that's the thing. Sometimes things that seem just are no longer just because it's not the right time. Things that seem right are no longer right because it's the wrong time. Not every opportunity Satan brings us in itself is going to seem bad. Some opportunities we'll see will be good in itself, but because the Lord ain't there and it's the wrong time, that would make it bad. Oftentimes people in churches backslide from after certain amounts of pressures because the opportunity they went for was good, yet the Lord hadn't called them into it because He hasn't prepared them yet. And we don't think of much about that as sin, but that's exactly what that is. Because we got to be able to wait on the Lord, be patient. Joab wasn't doing this. Joab was taking what he wanted, accomplishing it, and seeing it as good. And oftentimes when we're burdened down by the Lord, that's exactly down by the things what we think are the Lord. That's exactly why. Because we're stepping out on our own rather than being guided by the Lord. We're stepping out in front of Him and hoping He follows along with where we're going rather than let Him lead. David said to Joab and all the people with him, "Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and mourn before Abner. As for King David, he followed behind the bier." So now they're mourning, they're grieving over Abner. They just, not too long ago, they grieved over the loss of the men, including Joab's brother. They mourned over it. So for this, Joab at this point ain't put to death yet. He's saying we take a time to mourn. He's making him mourn Abner's death. Because Abner at this point in time was an ally, no longer an enemy. And sometimes, once we do what our own actions are, God allows us to be put in a place as a result of them to where we rethink things and recognize, okay, maybe that ain't it, what it was supposed to be. And this, even though Joab would still die, this period where he was forced to mourn would probably give him give him a chance to think. I don't think he took advantage of it. He still had his hate in his heart, and in fact, maybe even turned him a little more against David in his judgment because he acted against David's better judgment and acted on his own. And sometimes when we're put in this place like that, we can either seek the Lord and get things right, or the fact that we're put that as a result of our own, when we see we're following the Lord, can result in us even further falling away, which is exactly what Satan wants us to do, further fall away. But we need to take that time to accept that what we were doing was on our own will, rather than following His will, and submit to Him and allow Him to lead us.